Let's do a quick question and answer session. Anything's not clear or any troubles with either the design or the model in general, let me know, and I'll try to explain it as best as I can. Where did my voice go? Let me just open up the chat, have it somewhere here. Perhaps it's a little bit too early for questions, but I assume you have a bunch, you just don't dare to ask. So now it's the time. Now it's the time to ask the questions. In the meanwhile, here I'm just going to kind of brush out a little bit of more detail into this guy. So where you should be in the process right now? Right now you should be like for Thursday. Let's see, for this Thursday, you should have the, how do I call it? You should have the abstract shape, you know, a shape like this done. And it should be, you know, closely resembling a building, not necessarily an enclosed volume or whatever, but it should be resembling what you're going to be working with later during the next week. So I know it's a little bit abstract of an explanation, but with different types of models or different types of approaches, you'd be at different stages of the project right now, and you are at different stages of the project. So I don't want to give any kind of concrete, concrete answer that this is exactly what you need to have, A, B, C, D, because every approach is different. But if I were to, condense it into one sentence, you need to have a form from which you will remodel a building, right? So a form which you will use as a base, as a reference for modeling out the building by hand in Rhino. And I will be showing you how to do that today. You know, the hand modeling. And later process next week. So next week you move out of this kind of conceptual sketching phase and you start, well, first of all, you change the model according to what kind of feedback you'll receive. But second of all, you will jump into, what am I doing here? Yeah, you will jump into Rhino and start remodeling the whole thing in a very clean and controlled way, right? So it's going to be a lot of work to do that, but it is what is needed to be done. It's a very important notion, like parametrics wise and sculpting wise and modeling wise, there's always, you know, there's always the correct time for parametrics and for Grasshopper. And there is also always a correct time for hand modeling or traditional, you know, traditional design. And at this stage, parametrics, you don't need parametrics at this particular stage. You'll just need to sit down and model the building for the next 2 weeks or so. Right. So for the next 2 weeks, after this workshop is done, you will just be modeling 8 hours per day. Don't like that seam. Just a second, I'll get to another question. It's a little bit better. So we have something like this. Sure. Okay, so you start working on your reports. Well, think of it this way. Right now, you are preparing material for your reports. So now you're working on material for your reports, right? And you will start working on the reports themselves somewhere in between the mid review and the final review. Somewhere in between those. What do I want to do with this? Maybe something like that. Will Thursday's presentation be kind of the same as yesterday's? It's going to be much more prepared on your part. So you will need to have, just like I wrote in the email a few days ago, you will need to have a proper PDF presentation showing what you've been working on and what you have done so far. Also showing the analysis of the site and so on. Right. Okay. Since it's just the first form, I suppose that we do in Blender what we do in Blender won't follow into the next version of the form if we change it in Grasshopper Rhino. So we'll redo the connections in Blender several times. Not necessarily. Like why we do this in Blender, like why we're working with it in Blender, it's because it's much faster to make decisions in Blender when sculpting in Blender, you know, carving in, carving out, and so on. Meaning that in Blender, you are not creating the final form right now, but instead you are kind of working with how you imagine the form would be connecting to the ground and how you imagine additional, you know, geometrical information would be happening with the form, if that makes any sense. Maybe something like that. So should the final form in that regard? No, the final form, the one that you're going to extract drawings from will be made purely in Rhino. And it will have really clean geometry. This is not clean geometry, like what you get out of Blender. First of all, it's a mesh, right? So that's already pretty bad for architectural drawings. But as I said yesterday, we use Blender to sketch. We don't use Blender to make the final shape. I will be showing you, once you sketch out an idea in Blender, how to remodel that in Rhino in like 15 minutes or so, but well, maybe more, 30 minutes or so. But the main idea is that what you sketch in Blender, like you sketch in Blender simply because it's much faster to make decisions in Blender than it is to make decisions in Rhino, right? I just thought that maybe, you know, this part could have a sharp point, and then in like 3 minutes I already have a sharp point here. In Rhino, remodeling all of this would take me at least a few hours. Right? Like that. For instance, I don't like this, how this part works. So I'll just completely annihilate it. So perhaps there's a brush that we can add thickness to here and kind of increase the thickness like so. That everything is flowing together to one part. What if we do something like that? So today is going to be more of a, as I said multiple times, today is going to be a little bit more of a hangout session rather than a straight up tutorial, because right now all of the tools that you would need to produce basically any shape are there for you. The only difference is that you need to make up your minds on what kind of tools you're going to be using. So I know I'm repeating myself with this, but I believe this is a pretty important thing. You don't need to use Grasshopper to produce an interesting form or whatnot, or to follow a certain aesthetic. There's always a place for Grasshopper, and there's always a place for hand modeling. I don't know how to say it. Not necessarily hand modeling, but traditional design, let's say. There's always a place for those, and you should kind of choose whichever you think works on your form or on your idea better. Does that make sense? I mean, this, even if you're like doing even if you're doing some sort of a porous structure, it's not necessary to use Grasshopper for it. I'm just destroying this. It's not necessary to use Grasshopper for it. You can use straight up Rhino and model out that porous structure in Rhino. But if modeling out that porous structure, let's say you need an insane amount of detail in it for some reason, and it would take you, you kind of count that one pore or one opening takes you 3 hours to do, or something like that, and you need 100 of them, that's 300 hours, and then you divide it up. I can't do math. And also I'm using a Swedish keyboard, so I don't know where my division, come on. I don't know where my division button is on the keyboard. Wait, yeah. So that, if you need something to do something in, that would take 300 hours, and you like spend 8 hours per day, that's going to be 37 and a half days to do it, right? So that's a little bit too much. At that point, you start looking into automating the design process, and you actually using Grasshopper. For instance, if I were to, like this dome shape, right? This dome shape. If I were to say that I'm going to hand model this dome shape, and it's going to be compression only based structure, I would need so much time to do it, right? Because I can model a dome shape in Rhino really fast, but it won't be a compression only based structure. So at that point, I turn to simulation, right, rather than just straight up modeling. But if I only need to do, a certain aesthetic, like if I don't care if it's a compression only based structure or not, And if I only need to do a certain aesthetic, then I would definitely just straight up open Rhino, right, and model it out in Rhino. Don't know what I'm doing with this one. Just hit the half of it with smooth. Just move this out. Yeah, that's fine. So in a few more minutes, and then I'll jump back into Rhino and start showing you how I would surface this. In terms of, okay, so now I have a question for you guys. In terms of control, like in terms of control that you have over your shape, which software gives you, in your opinion, or in your experience, gives you most control? Rhino, Grasshopper, Rhino or Blender? Let's say it like this. If you, let me rephrase the question. Not because I don't like the answers, but because I want it to be a bit more, I want to be a bit more precise with the question. If you do a certain shape, right? Certain, dome structure or whatnot, and you needed to solve how that dome structure, for instance, not necessarily connects to the ground, but some sort of a connection between two shapes, right? If you need to solve those, which program would you use to, like, which program would be the most, not necessarily suitable, but easiest to use for that? That's nice. Rhino. Okay, good. And what kind of, why? Well, what's the benefit of Rhino over Grasshopper or over Revit or over Blender in this case? Simply just having more experience in it, right? So I think this is an important distinction that we need to make. Grasshopper is used only like when you need to do something that is streamlined, something that is either simulation based or extremely repetitive, and you need to do it like, you need to go through 500,000 iterations, then Rhino definitely makes sense, right? Grasshopper definitely makes sense to use, because you describe the form in Grasshopper, you describe it with the rules. But the problem with Grasshopper is that every additional add-on to the form is going to be an additional rule that you need to incorporate to already existing rule sets. Does that make sense? So in that regard, Grasshopper is very slow, right? If you need to keep adding additional rules. But if you already have a predetermined rule set of what you want to achieve, that's actually okay. If you have an already predetermined rule set of what you want to achieve, let's say I want to have 5 Whoa, that was very laggy. Let me do that again. There we go. If I want to have five curves that from which I loft out a blob, right? Like Greg Lynn did it with his, well, it was, I think it was 12 curves with Greg Lynn's embryological house. But let's say if you have those 12 curves and you want to loft out 50,000 different blobs with those 12 curves, you could kind of do that in Rhino, right? You just sit down and you kind of I don't know, in a year, you model it through. Or you could create a script that does that for you. So that's great. But then, and let's say to do a script, it takes you, a month. And to do 50,000 versions of the same loft with different curves is going to take you a year. But then what if you want to add functionality that the curves can be also, as they're being lofted, they can be rotated or whatever, right? Or you can change their degree, for instance. That would be another, let's say, well, right now I'm being really generous, let's say, with the time, but let's say that would be another month, right, to do. So at a certain point, using Grasshopper stops making sense. But when it's something that is streamlined, that point is much, much further away when there's something that is one-off, right? Let's say I'm modeling it out this pathway here. Imagine doing this in Grasshopper, right? Trying to describe this shape in Grasshopper. You wouldn't be able to do it. So that's the nice thing about using, well, right now I'm using Blender, so I'm going to talk about Blender, but that's the nice thing about Blender, right? And in general, that's the nice thing about, I'll just leave it as it is. Good. That's the nice thing about hand modeling. It's as long as you're doing a one-off, right? A single iteration, not iteration, but a single form, then in most cases you save time by just modeling it out by hand. I'll just leave it as it is. Screw it. That's enough here. And that's what we're going to do now. So let me quickly switch to my mouse and just show you a tutorial about it. Well, it's not going to be a tutorial. And as I'm doing it, you can keep asking questions. I'll make sure to follow the chat and answer them. So now I'll just switch to edit mode, hitting the tab button. And you can see the density is a little bit high, right here in this area. That's because that was the area that I mostly worked on. And it's all weird, I know, but I just wanted to create as many surfaces as possible without actually looking into, the logic behind it and the composition of it. Well, I kind of looked a little bit towards the composition, but I didn't look into the logic or the function behind it. So that I will just hit it with mesh, cleanup, decimate geometry. And I will just say, give me something low, like 0.1, like 10% of the original. There we go. So that is much nicer. Let me just jump back to Sculpt mode. We did lose a little bit of edge information here and there, but other than that, I think this is still fine. This is still workable. So I will just, first I'll just save the file, and then I will export as OBJ to my desktop, and I'll just call it workshop 3 day 3 or whatever export. Just hit export OBJ. If it's gonna import rotated, that's fine. We'll rotate it back in Rhino. That's easy. So it gets exported. While it's doing that, I will just run Rhino. So I'll open up Rhino. Just a clean new file. Now I'll choose, wait, let me just double check if it got exported or not. Yeah, okay. So it got exported. I'll just go to File, Import, find the exported file, the OBJ file. Oh, it even shows me a nice rotating view around it. That's cool. I guess it's a new Windows thing. I'll hit open. Okay. And yeah, it imports rotated, but that's fine. I can just kind of rotate it back like this. And actually, let me move it. M, enter, V, enter. I'll just move it to 0 height, right? Like this. Just to keep things clean. What the heck? Oh, right. So in Blender, I have one hidden geometry as well, the landscape, the original landscape geometry. I have that hidden. It exports the hidden geometry as well, right? So I'll just select the original landscape that was hidden and just hit delete to just see the clean geometry here. Okay. Ew. Clean geometry, sure. Anyway, so this is where we start messing around with it, right? And not messing around, but rebuilding it. I'll jump to top view. And I will choose a tool that's called Extract Mesh Faces. Enter. Make sure that make copy is set to be no. So it doesn't make a copy, it actually just extracts. It's like exploding, partially exploding the mesh. So it just will extract the mesh faces. And then I will select the faces that I want to extract, something like this. And this is just going to be the surface that I'm going to be working with, nothing else, right? So I just select them, I hit enter. And now this mesh is separated from the landscape, right? Let me close Blender. It's a little bit obnoxious. So now I can hide that landscape part, which I don't need, and just work on this one. Everyone with me so far? Understood? Yeah. So this is just for me to be able to rotate around it freely and kind of build surfaces more easily. Okay, and now this is the tricky part. Yeah, and I won't I won't repeat it if you were just away. So right now I'll just create a new layer and I'll just call it curves or construction curves, whatever. I'll just call it curves and I'll make it red. Right, so that layer is red. And I'm going to first start drawing curves on top of this mesh. So important thing is I don't want to accidentally select the mesh. So I'll just select it and lock it in place. Second, I don't want to have any snaps on except for vertex snap and end snap. So I'll turn off every other snap. Only vertex and end snaps should be on. And the last thing that I like to do is instead of using a shaded view, I use ghosted view. Just so that it's easier for me to kind of see what's going on with the geometry. And then you take a Nurbs curve. In this case, I will use a curve interpolate points to force the curve to go through the points. Or not even that, maybe just a regular. Yeah, I'll just use actually the regular Nurbs curve, sorry. Switch to curves layer and I will start remodeling out this form with surfaces, right? So to start with, I need to determine, which surface is gonna be the first one. So let me just say, I want a surface, or sorry, which edge is going to be the first one. And I'll just say I want an edge that's going through here, and let me quickly change back. Is this what the very many does? In some cases, not the very many works with meshes, so they do this part. They have a script for once they did this part, the extracting the stripes. They have a script that will work with those extracted stripes, but I assume they extract the stripes by hand, right? So back here, I'll just choose a control point curve. And I'll just start with, let's say this edge right here. So vertex here, let's say vertex here, here. I'll just pick this one. And as you can see, I'm not being precise. It's just I want to catch an approximate edge there. That. Let's see that. Like that. Like that. So I have one curve here that's doing its thing. I'll take, as you can see, I'm starting from here just simply because I'm not planning to do the whole structure in another like hour or so. So I'm starting from just from one leg. So let me say this edge, and this is why, how do you call that? The seam thing. God damn it, pinch. Why the pinch tool is really your friend. Because as long as you use the pinch tool, it will help you determine where those seams are for your lofts and for your curves. Let me do that. Do that. That. Yeah, I think that's good. But why did the curve do? Oh, whoops. Accidentally put a point in the wrong place. So let me say do that, and let's say we end there. So now I have two curves, right? And what I like doing is I prefer rebuilding them, rebuild, and using like 5 points or you know, some slightly lower amount of points. If I use 5 points, you can see that the curves will be quite different. Sorry, degree 3. The curves will be quite different from the original ones, right? Especially here, but at the same time, they will be smoother, right? So there's a trade-off. You either are precise to the mesh, or you're precise to the, not necessarily precise, but smoother with your approach. So I prefer to be smoother. Just hit OK. And I have now 2 smooth curves, which I can loft. Okay. And now I have my first surface here done. Okay. Let me create a new layer and call it surfaces. Make it blue. And add my first surface there. And I'll just lock the whole layer so that I can't accidentally select the surface. And then I continue. Control point curve from here. So you all can see how much fun you're going to have. But this is a big, you know, big part of modeling. And using some sort of underlying sketch will help you out model it much faster, I guess. Yeah, the key word is faster. So you'll be able to model it faster. Does this needs to be, no, this needs to be done. Okay, so the timeline is like so. After tomorrow, let me just hit enter. After tomorrow, you will have, tomorrow you'll receive feedback on your form and so on. So all of the feedback that you've received on Wednesday, you should kind of reflect on it for tomorrow. Wait, sorry, I thought I will sneeze. What? Yeah, sorry, all of the feedback that you've received on Tuesday, yesterday. You should reflect on it by tomorrow and have it, have another version of your model done for tomorrow. And I would suggest that, not suggest, but I would insist that it also has at least the sculpting part of how the structure meets the ground, kind of, on its way or already done. But for surfacing part, this is going to be after Thursday. During Thursday, you will receive more feedback, right? You will receive more information of what needs to be changed, what needs to be done, and so on. So that's going to be, am I drawing a polyline? Yes, I am drawing a polyline. Okay, so we cut off there. So the feedback that you'll receive during Thursday, you'll need to react to it in the next week, right? So week after Thursday, you should have like the next version of your model, and that one can be still sketchy, but after that, that version is going to be something that you will already start remodeling in Rhino, if you haven't already. So everything that is mesh based will need to be remodeled to be surface based, except a few exceptions, right? And you need to be kind of mindful, I guess, of it. For instance, the cocoon tentacles, right? If the cocoon, like tentacles or roots or whatnot, those cocoon pipes, if they will not need to have any additional, is it information? Not information, but any additional stuff happening with them, then you don't need to surface them. It feels like tracing technique creates quite flat surfaces. What if you have few seams and more round surfaces? Frey, are you talking about the cellular automata one? In your case, it's going to be mesh to Nurb command. For something that is not surface-based, right now I'm showing it as a surface-based. Why is it snapping so weird? I'm showing it as a surface-based geometry, right? So I'm rebuilding surfaces. How you translate Blender stuff to Rhino. Okay, so I can show you a few more tools. Let me just finish up with this one, and then I will show you a few more tools. If you don't see surfaces in Rhino that are exported from Blender, that means you need to revisit Blender and use the pinch. use the pinch quite a bit more, so that they indeed get so that you indeed do see the surfaces. Like blobby stuff, not necessarily blobby stuff, but if you were just to sculpt it out, like from mud or whatnot, it would be way too uncontrolled, so to say. So if you're sculpting something out that is really, that doesn't have any edges whatsoever, any sharp edges, that means you are completely losing control over the form. As a sculptor, you might be able to control it, but as an architecture student, that indicates to me that you're completely losing control over the form itself. I'll just do this maybe. It assumes that they are more flat surfaces from, what do you mean by that? It assumes that they are more flat surfaces from the beginning. Who's it? No, that's what I'm here for, to try and explain the confusion.
Yeah. Let's just unmute myself. Yeah. Yeah, what I was thinking was like, those of us who are working with the cocoons, they're quite like inflated and almost like balloon shaped in some like, are we, do you think that we should, when we work with them in Blender, that we're like, should like define edges and so on, so that the like really round surfaces become more like a collection of more flat surfaces or strips? Or like, how do you build them with the polylines?
Yeah, well, not necessarily polylines. I wouldn't suggest polylines for sure.
Or well, Nurbs, yeah.
Yeah, but Nurbs curves, yeah. I believe that every geometry, like in architecture, if it's if it doesn't have a clean seam, a clean seam like what I'm drawing right now here, it's going to be very muddy. Frey, does that word make sense?
Yeah. So you need some kind of like contrast and some kind of like where something ends and begins, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like when you're drawing a picture, right, with pencil, and then you're using your finger to smudge the shadow, right, to make the soft shadow. It doesn't do justice to the picture, right? It just becomes a little bit, the picture itself becomes a little bit muddy. Like, yeah, I guess low contrast is also the thing. in doing it like so, you kind of describe how that surface, how that structure would be made, right? So I think like having this kind of approach where you introduce seams and you follow the seams as you're rebuilding the shape, I think that kind of approach will definitely, you know, be beneficial to readability of the.
So because I was thinking like about Olga told me about like this was it an opera house library no opera house yesterday and it seems like that is like that there's not many scenes, but maybe they are not just very like that you don't notice them much, or maybe it's just that it's harder to make it or more difficult.
Oh, you're talking about these. This is a completely different, well, not necessarily a completely different thing, but there are indeed seams, and you can. This is a very bad picture of it. Well, not necessarily a bad picture, but there are directionalities here. There are indeed like seam wise. There are no seams. It's a seamless structure, but there are directionalities within the structure. Meaning that everything here is, it has a very clear, you know, cross section, I guess. Let me try to explain it better. So everything here, right? Let me jump into Rhino. Is basically, if I have a cylinder, let me just start drawing a cylinder from here, and let's say it's 10 by 50, perhaps 10 by 50. And let me just rotate it like so, and rotate it again like so. Oh, hello, alt, rotate it like so. Boolean union, extract, extract surface. I'll just get rid of the caps of these guys now. That was not a cap. That's fine. Let me just open it up real quick. Hello. Extract surface. Okay, so it's all opened up. So the underlying logic of that form is this, right? Why can't I copy it? Let's just do it like that. This. Come on. And that, right? That's the underlying logic of this form. The only difference between this form and this is that this has hard edges, right? So I can fix that by introducing a fillet edge. Fillet edge. Radius, so if that is 50 and that is 10, we're left with 20. So I'll just give it like 15 radius. That is not how you write 15. 15 radius. I'll just mark out the inner seams like so. Give it the radius. Oh, it broke. Why? Why did it break? Is it too close? I think I messed up with this edge. Okay, let me give it a slightly smaller radius. That will work. Like that. Yeah, there we go. Right, so if I were to look at it with EMAP, you can see that this is a perfectly smooth surface, right? And it looks kind of blobby and so on, but it has an underlying logic behind it, right? Of how I've built this structure. And then if I were to move it by 50 to the side, come on. Move it again by 50 to the side. Let's do it a few more times. 50, 50, and one more time upwards, 50. Join it all up. Emap again. We're slowly getting closer and closer to Toyo Ito's form, right? Right now we're still here, we're dealing with cylinders and so on, but you know, I didn't spend a lot of time fixing this. Then I could, you know, just to save time, I will be meshing it and showing you it with the mesh, but you would be doing it with this surface here instead. But I could say that, well, what if I, let me fill mesh holes first, so that it's not in the way. And then what if I were to use cage edit, for instance, on it, right? Because I have an underlying logic right now of how it works. And remember, I'm showing it on a mesh for it to be faster, but you would be using it with the surface here, poly surface here. Bounding box, yeah. What if I use, you know, the cage edit tool to kind of mess with it and play around with it. So the more actually, let's rotate it. Why not? Right? So this guy, if I were to use the poly surface, would still have exactly the same logic of just pipes connecting, you know, with Boolean union. But you can see it became something completely different, right, from it. Does that answer answer the question of, you know?
So the like the idea with having defined edges and seams is that it maybe makes up for maybe a lack of like a system.
You don't define you define the logic of the structure or the logic behind the shell, right? So it's not necessarily the fact that you're defining a hard edge where the seam is, right? It's not necessarily that, but you're defining how that structure, extract surface, you know, how that structure is connected to the rest, like how one part of it is connected to the rest of the building, right? So you, in this case, my argument would be that this edge in between, right? This edge right here, or let me make it more clear. Join, duplicate edge, duplicate border. This edge right here is indeed the seam. The only difference is that in my case, modeling it out here, the seams are hard edges, right? So they're not tangent edges, while here the seam is, well, for the lack of better word, seamless, right? It's a tangent-based seam, meaning that the curvature is continuous between them. But how one pipe connects to other pipes is solved through, in this case, is solved through a simple fillet, right? And that seam appears after you've used the fillet on it, right? So even with something like cellular automata models, you still need to have a kind of a grasp on how things connect, right? But you don't necessarily need to rebuild every single aspect of the building. You just need to rebuild the parts which you get from sculpting, for instance. And this is where, you know, it's hard to talk about a specific, you know, why I'm stumbling on this question is because there are 24 projects right now, right, in the course, 24 different projects. And every one of those 24 different projects have a different approach, right, and a different methodology. And just saying that you need to rebuild the whole thing from, you know, these surfaces, or you need to think about pipes. And if I were to say exactly this for 24 projects, that wouldn't be precise. So I'm just, you know, kind of jumping around the question without giving you a concrete answer, because it will change depending on the project. When it comes down to cellular automata projects, most of those are already quite well controlled with meshes, and you can use mesh to brep to recreate a poly surface from a mesh on them. But in the place where the geometry meets the ground, if you have sculpted on top of it, it's just going to be a soup of triangles, right? So that soup of triangles needs to be rebuilt in a much more controlled manner, like so. In case of dome structures, again, the dome structure itself can stay as a mesh, and then you can use a mesh to Nurb to rebuild a Nurbs poly surface from a mesh dome structure, and that's fine. But in the place where it meets the ground, there needs to be a certain amount of cleanup. So all I'm doing right now here is cleanup, right? In case of cocoon lines, you don't even need to do mesh to Nurbs. You can stay with meshes, simply because those don't describe form, those just describe structure, meaning that you will not be creating rooms in them, and you will be using them more like these kind of linear elements rather than room holding architectural elements, if that makes sense, and so on. So we have 24 projects, and I can't go through all 24 and explain which parts of them need to be cleaned up. This is absolutely up to you. All I want to do now is just give you a set of tools. First of all, I gave you a set of tools to create a sketch of the form. And now I'm giving you another, well, it's not necessarily a set of tools, but a showcase of how you can, why does it keep doing that? A showcase of how you can, you know, clean up the sketch to be usable later on. And as you're cleaning it up, for instance, here there's this pocket, which I have here. I'm just deciding not to have it in my final model, right? In my final form, the cleaned up form. So I'm just completely ignoring it. And once I loft between the top edge and the bottom edge, that pocket is going to be gone. So there's a lot of decision making involved here as well. I will be showing you a few more tools here, but I don't know. Does that answer at least a part of your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to like, because I just wanted to like discuss like different aspects of how you use it. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That's good then. So now I'm at this stage, and I believe I can kind of let me see. Let me join these guys up. join, emap, just to check the curvature. Yeah, we are slowly getting there with the shape. Right, these hard edges later on, I could I could fillet them, I could chamfer them, and to kind of hide them a little bit. But honestly, I don't see the point in doing that. Hard edge stuff is nice, and also it should be kept as hard edges right before the final export of the drawings, simply because once you fillet something, it's much harder to control it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you have like a series of boxes or like volumes, and in this case I set them to array polar, is it possible to make it like attractors, like where the central cube is larger than the ones on the sides, or is that something you'd need to do in Grasshopper?
Wait,
Can you scale it?
Let's try again. So you have an array of boxes. So those boxes are in a grid or what?
No, they're just from one cube set on like array. What's it called? Offset array? No. Yeah, and if it's possible to make like transition from smaller to larger in any way.
Oh, that would be definitely in Grasshopper. But then ask yourself the question: is it necessary for them to be? What do you gain? What do you gain by having them arrayed like that? Right, by changing the size of the boxes. Right
Like
now, I'm just talking about not the technicalities of it, but the specific, architectural, gain.
Yeah, but it'll be kind of a gradual, like feathers on a bird, like the different sizes, I suppose, and also making the interior rooms into different sizes as well.
Okay. So you can do that in Grasshopper for sure, but you mentioned the fact interior rooms, right? Which immediately tells me that every box will be kind of tailored, like to fit a certain interior condition in it, right?
Maybe in the future, yeah, but right now I'm not thinking too much of it.
But even if it is, that means that in Grasshopper you won't be able to control. Well, you would need to write a separate script to be able to control that aspect of it, which is a bitch to do, basically. Okay. So it's much better to use, what was the name of it? Conventional, to use conventional modeling techniques for those boxes, simply because with Grasshopper, it's easy to do a mathematical equation where, the closer the boxes are to a point, the bigger they become, or the further they are away from the point, the smaller they become. Yeah, that's easy to do. But describing, like, it's a very, very stupid, like, attractor point based approach from just what's subjective objective, just from objective point of view, is a very, very stupid approach in regard to it being not flexible at all, right? So human mind is much better than a computer at this stage, simply because we can improvise and we can adapt much better, right? If we're using, let's say, if some function changes in your building and you're using an attractor point based allocation of the size for your volumes, then it would kind of destroy the whole script, right? You would need to rethink the whole script from scratch.
Yeah.
While if you are just modeling it out, then you could come in there and scale up one of the boxes, right? And incorporate a bigger function in it, for instance.
Mm.
So I think it's much better to do it by hand at this stage.
Okay.
We will be coming back to Grasshopper a few times throughout this course. One is going to be once you start developing a certain pattern strategy, right? For either a facade or a paneling system or something like that. Then we will revisit Grasshopper simply because it's a much faster way to produce, you know, clean logic of the panels, a pattern of the panels within Grasshopper rather than it is to do it by hand. But other than that, right now we're moving into, what am I doing here? Wait, that's the wrong surface. Oops. Right now we're moving into the part where it's just hardcore modeling. Right?
Okay.
And yeah, it is how it is. For instance, here, right? I have a bit of a problem. Let me go to this. This surface right here and this future surface in between these two lines here messes up at this point, right? Because I need this to start making a turn while this one kind of continues on. So I need an additional line, and let me just quickly draw it out. Maybe that's going to be easier to kind of explain, and let me choose where I'll have the line going. Let's see, something like that. Maybe, yeah, I'll just follow this. Something like that. Okay, so back here. Whoa, whoops. Can we just delete that control point, or will it screw up? No, it's fine. So apparently you can delete control points. So back here, I want to have a surface that's going here in between these two lines, and then kind of joins in between these two lines here, right? And basically branches out. And I can't do that easily. If I were to try and do it, it wouldn't make a clean seam. So what I'm going to try and do is I will take this curve, I will put a point on it. So I need to, for a short time, I need to turn on the near snap on, and I'll just put a point on it for this curve. And I will split, so type in split, select objects to split. I will split this curve, enter, with this point, enter. And then I don't need the point anymore. So now I have two curves. One that is the small top portion and the other one that is the big bottom portion. So now what I can do is I can take the top portion of the curve and not the bottom portion, I don't know how to call it. Well, basically I can take this curve here and I can take this curve here and use blend curve to blend between them. Blend curve. Select curve to blend this and this. So it's going to create a blend for me. I'll just turn on join so that they get immediately joined up. And then I can use loft. And here you can see that loft is not doing a great job. The ISO curves are not aligning properly. So instead of loft, I will actually create a line segment from here to here, from two endpoints, and I'll use sweep 2. Select first rail, select second rail, select cross-section curve, enter, and you can see that sweep is a much cleaner like it works in a much cleaner way than Loft. Hit OK. We have our form here. And at this point, it will cleanly connect with this surface. So I'm slowly building it up. By the way, Andrew, did it answer your question? Did I answer your question properly?
Yeah, like more model brute force in Rhino to get more control.
There's no such thing as brute force. It's just modeling versus simulating versus sculpting versus I don't even know automating. I guess automating would be another one. So simulating and automating is in Grasshopper, modeling is in Rhino or Revit, sculpting is in Blender. Those are basically all of the different approaches that you can have to creating a shape. And I tried during these workshops, I tried to show you every single one of those approaches. And basically at this point, it's up to you to choose which one you want to work with, continue working with, and which one you basically prefer. Right, so there's one more thing that I wanted to show, and it's not, I didn't make a nice, yeah, I can do it here, for instance. So this whole dome shape, not a dome shape, what am I talking, like reverse dome shape for the landscape, bowl shape, let's call it like that. Let's see if I grab a curve tool and I just go around the perimeter of the skate park thing. Is it, let me just make sure that it snaps properly. I'm just kind of going through along the perimeter here. Just make sure that you're snapping to every, like every click is snapping to some sort of a vertex. That's good enough. Yeah. No, it takes a little bit of time.
Sorry. Is it a good idea to go back to the metaphor way of thinking, just to like relink the ideas to? It's
always a good idea to come back to the metaphor, because that's one of the founding, how do I explain it? That's one of the founding thoughts or ideas from which your project came to be. So I think it's always a good idea to come back to the metaphor workshop and what you were talking about during it, and double check, does your form follow that metaphor workshop idea? Here I've just did a perimeter around an area which I want to surface. And if I were to use planar surface on the perimeter, it won't work. If I were to use network surface, it won't work. The only thing that would work is called patch. Patch, if I hit enter, it will ask me what's the resolution that I want for the patch. I will just say 10 by 10, sure. Hit preview. That's what kind of surface it's going to create. So you can see that patch doesn't care about the depth at this point. But what I can do is I can come in here and I can add a few points here, here, for the patch to catch onto. to determine the depth of this bowl that I'm creating. Right? Like that. And I'm doing it in a very, you know, like a quick and dirty way. I would usually spend around like half an hour with just this portion, just to make sure that it's, you know, clean. But the beauty of patch is that it works with curves and points at the same time. So if I select all of the points that I've placed and I select my perimeter curve and I use patch, yeah, sure, I'll keep it 10 by 10. Now you can see that the patch follows the geometry much, much better. If I give it more resolution, let's say 20 by 20, preview, the patch follows it even better, right? So I'll just hit OK. But there is one trade-off of the patch that you need to be very mindful of. If I were to zoom in here, let me find right now we're running it with a pretty high resolution, so it's hard to see. Yeah, for instance here, there's the curve and there's the patch edge, so the surface edge, and they don't line up, meaning that the patch doesn't perfectly follow the geometry that you've given it because it uses a certain resolution. So what you need to do if you're using patch, after you've created the surface, you need to delete the curve, delete the points, so that it's only the patch surface that is left, and use duplicate border on the patch surface to rebuild exact perimeter of the surface. Because then if you, for instance, need to use it for, you know, this kind of approach of blending, you need that perimeter to be exactly aligned with the patch surface. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's have a 15-minute break, and then I will call you back. Cool. Let me just hit the recording again. So the first one is I've just imported the model, which I've used for, yeah, it's in the incorrect scale and so on, and for some reason inverted here. There we go. So I've imported the model of that helmet that you've already seen. I believe I've sent all of you the file with. Did I send you the file with people having these kind of helmets on their heads or not? I don't remember. Yeah, okay. So that model was done from that Blender Sculpt that I've showed you yesterday. And this is a 37 different poly surfaces. Actually, we don't need the lady here. Let me just delete her. Move that helmet down here. Yeah, and it's a little bit too, it's a little bit out of scale, but it doesn't matter. So here we have 37 poly surfaces. Let me ungroup them. I left them as separate poly surfaces just so that I could add different materials to them, right? Instead of joining everything into one poly surface. But it's mostly most of these are just somewhat clean geometries here and there. So I'm just breaking it apart for you to see what I mean by rebuilding the mesh into Nurbs polysurface parts, so that you can later on use them for you know, for your design. The way the surfaces were made, for instance, this surface was made, it was patch. I used patch, and then I used project curves to this underlying geometry, which I can kind of move down here. This underlying geometry, which was just a network surface. I projected the curves edges from the patch, and then I used loft, or was it sweep between two rails to kind of create a thickness for them. So this part here, not this part, but this whole helmet was done to see if I can show you, you know, this whole rebuilding technique. If I can show this rebuilding technique of mesh back into polysurface by hand to you, and if it's doable by students, because bless you, if it's doable by students, right? This one took me around 6-7 hours to do, like all of it. So I assume for you know, and this was the first time that I did it. So I assume for you guys it's going to take a little bit, tiny bit longer, but it shouldn't be that bad. So a few days of work should give you a pretty decent result, right? So these were all of the parts that I've remodeled from that original sculpt. Do you have any questions about this part that you know you might want me to explain better, or kind of to touch upon any aspects of it? I assume no. Okay. So hopefully that part is. The parts are not. No, the parts are not solid. You can see here that I left them all opened, but I can easily make them solid by simply because, like, why the parts are not solid? Simply because I used this not for 3D printing, this part, but for rendering purposes. And at that point, I don't care if they are solid or not, right? But if I were to 3D print it, I would need all of this to be a single closed polysurface. Move this back. Single closed polysurface. And then what I would do is I would use those edges, right? Let me take this guy, for instance, duplicate border, move it down. So I would use this edge, right, that I have just duplicated, to trim away a hole in this form right here. And then I would be able to join this plate with a trimmed hole in the top of the helmet here. So this form right here would be a form which has a lot of holes, and all of those holes kind of my plates connect to all of those holes in a very clean way, and by the end I would have a single closed polysurface. Just let me know if that makes sense, or if I should kind of explain some part a little bit better. Okay. So it was just for I've used this helmet just for rendering purposes. That's why it's not closed. Right. So that's the helmet. Regarding the patch surface, here I've kind of showed an example of it, but let me show another one. because I think it's a very strong tool, but it also requires you to be very mindful that you're playing around with. Every time when you're using patch surface, in the back of your head, you need to have understanding that the edge of the patch surface will not match up with the curve, the perimeter curve that you give it. So for instance, here, let me draw a sphere, another sphere like that. Let me actually kind of mess around with the scale of the second one. No need it to be that, that different, but just something a little bit different. You have two spheres, we Boolean union them together into one shape. And let me use, just move them a little bit away. Let me use cage edit on them. Hello? What? Cage edit. Oh, bounding box, enter, enter, enter. So I have some control points to work with. Let me just mess it up a little bit. Like that. Maybe this part is kind of going in. Maybe this part, this whole area is going up and out. Like that. Maybe this whole area is kind of slightly scaled down. Like that's good. And I will just take the, let's say the central part, and I'll just slightly rotate it, twist it. So that it has this kind of a, well, maybe a little bit more. It has this kind of a little bit of a twist to it. Nothing fancy. I just wanted to create a blob, right? So now I have my blob, and let's say you can create the center part of the blob by just making a bunch of sections through it and using loft, right? But the problematic part is the top and the bottom. So let's say you have some sort of a something like this. Take the surface. I'll explain it in a little bit. Just bear with me for now. Come on, all surface delete, and let's change this to surface. Okay, so let's say, or rather, I'll just keep this as red and just have these two as blue. Let's say you have already rebuilt your blob, this whole portion of the blob from a mesh into a poly surface or into separate surface ribbons, right? And let's say all of that works, and you just need to create the top part of it. Excel. You just need to create the top part of it. Then what I would use is a patch, to make the top part. Because using loft and so on for some, for these two blobs doesn't make any sense. We can't use loft on it, so we need to use patch. So I will just select it, isolate, and I will use, first of all, I'll use duplicate border, or in your case, you might draw the line by hand, but I will just use duplicate border here. And let me just rebuild the curve with, let's say 150 points, whatever. So I have a curve here, and in the bottom that represents where the edge of this patch will be, right? If I were to hide this and just use patch on it right now, it would just make, this kind of flat piece, which is not that nice. But I want to keep the show selected. I want to keep the curvature of it, at least a part of the curvature of the original. So I'll keep adding points, right? Just like we've done with the landscape. So I'll add point here, here, here. The more points you add, the more accurate it's going to be. So here I'm just kind of going around it, and I won't be adding too many points, just a few here and there to kind of get a to get the logic going. Oh, I missed one point. Yeah, that's not a lot of points, but good enough. So now let me just delete that mesh to show you, in that mesh part, to show you what we have. We have a curve, we have a bunch of points. I select all of them, I type in patch, I choose what's the resolution of my patch. 20 by 20 usually is pretty high. And I get something like this, right? So this is messing up in my case. Let me actually cancel the patch and come back here and see how I can fix it. I assume if I give it a few more points here, a little bit more information here, it should fix that part. Let's try again. Patch. Even worse. That's nice. And now it's not trimming anymore. What's up with that? Well, that's because this one is extending. So as you can see, patch is not, not perfect, and you need to fiddle with it until it starts kind of working. And the more curvature you have, the worse it's going to perform. So in this case, for instance, to fix this, I will just say, yeah, that's fine. Let me just reduce the resolution. And if I reduce the resolution, it becomes softer, right? Because it doesn't have that many edges to work with. And it still tries to kind of fit everything through these points. So let me reduce it even more. And at a certain point, we have kind of somewhat close of a patch for the top. So this is where you need to practice not getting married to the original shape and just saying, yeah, this looks actually good, right? And we will continue working with this. The problem is, show selected. The problem is right now that this surface and this surface, these two don't meet. Let me duplicate borders of both of them. See how these curves don't meet? That's because the patch works with a pre-described resolution, and it doesn't follow the curvature of the edge that perfectly. So then you have a choice. You either, well, you don't have a choice about this surface in between the patch and the remainder of your shape. So you need to delete that surface. And in between, this gap in between is going to be something that eats up the fact that this is a patch surface and it requires, a new approach for the border. So I will just duplicate border for the patch. And I'll duplicate the border for the remainder of my geometry. And in this case, I will show you the simplest one, which is just loft, right? Loft, and we have a sharp seam, which might be an aesthetic that emap, which might also be an aesthetic decision that you have, right? Blobby shapes playing around with more surface-based geometry, right? So you might have something like this, or, and I'm showing it with emap so that the ISO curves are not in the way for you. and you can kind of see the form better. You can also do another one, which is blend surface, blend SRF. Select first edge, this guy, select second edge. Oh, shit, we can't blend surface. Oh man, let me think real quick. So in this case, for instance, we can't use blend surface because here you can see that all of this, this whole shape is made out of separate line segments, while here everything is curvilinear. I think we can, like, there are a few ways of how to fix it. One is doing it in smaller portions and choosing, you know, that I will only blend between this portion of the edge here and this edge here. Or, how do we do that? What if we duplicate border, loft, loft this, delete, auto saving, just a second. There we go, auto save finished. What if we use match surface? Oh, it needs to be untrimmed. Ah, crap. Okay. Then all you can do is fillet, honestly. You can use the patch, not the patch, sorry. You can use blend surface if, let's say, on the bottom side you're working with the patch and on the top side you're working with the patch. Let me show you. Duplicate border. So I'm now going to rebuild the I'm going to rebuild the bottom part of my shape as a series of, not series, but as a single patch. This is becoming a bit tricky. While I'm doing it, let me explain why blend surface doesn't work better. Here you can see this sharp edge, right? Which means that this is not a seamless curve. And since it's not a seamless curve, and this one is seamless, it doesn't work with both of them, right? So for a curve that is not seamless, for a curve that has a breakpoint, blend surface will ask you to choose just one portion of the non-seamless curve before in between the breakpoints. While for the seamless curve is just going to take the whole thing, right? So it's the degree of curves. So now I'm just going to get rid of the bottom part. And here I need to change this into a seamless curve, right? So that's rebuild, command called rebuild. I can see that the point count here is 445 for my curve. I don't need that much. I will just use 150, hit OK. And now you can see that this, you know, it doesn't have a sharp break anymore. So now I can select this whole thing, type in patch, preview. Yeah, that actually looks pretty good. Except here. So this is where, you know, where patch starts screwing up, right? Where you have pretty low resolution and you have a pretty sharp bend, the patch will start screwing up. So then you need surface, let's see, 10 by 10. It's getting closer. And I don't want to increase it even more. Well, maybe I can increase it to like 15 by 15. So it's a lot of trial and error. When I increase it 15 by 15, these kind of discrepancies start appearing, which is not that great in the form. But actually, maybe that's pretty cool as well. I'll keep them. So with 15 by 15, it's doing this weird thing. Let me try 14 by 14. Maybe that's going to be a bit better. Preview. No, not better at all. That's fine. I'll keep it as it is. Hit OK. So this is a very drastic example of where the patch doesn't match up with the perimeter curve that you gave it. Let me delete it. But now what we can do is we can use blend, let me flip this. We can use blend surface to blend these two together. Blend SRF, select first edge here, select second edge here, enter. And it's going to blend them together. And here, for instance, it makes, starts making a little bit of a mistake. So let me see if I play around with the sliders, if I can fix it. If I can't fix it, then I would revisit. Can it be tangency? Tangency is a little bit better. Just trying to fix it. Seam height. What's up with the seam height? No, seam height sucks. Okay. What's add shapes? Oh my God. No. Blend surface again. First edge, second edge. Yes, enter. Add shapes from this curve to this curve. From this curve. So by using add shapes, I'm introducing where I want the sections to be. And you can see that this quick bend here messes it up a little bit for me, right? So the surface will start self-intersecting a bit, which in that regard, I would need to come back in here and kind of fix it a little bit. Because right now, like everything here, if I were to use EMAP on it, everything here is pretty damn good, right? Except for where we have a very sharp bend, right, inwards. And those need to be, those I would need to clean up. And cleaning them up would be getting in here, hitting that F10 button for solid points, and seeing how I can kind of move the not solid points, but for control points, seeing how I can move all of this so that this bend is not that sharp. Or alternatively, I could make this bend sharper so that they align better. So those are two ways of how to deal with these surfaces. Honestly, for me, introducing a little bit of, whoops. If Loft does that, then you just do sweep between two rails. Sweep 2 between here and here with this section curve. Here, come on, give me the section curve. There we go. And then using add slash. So what add slash does is the same thing as for blend surface, where you add shape or whatever it was called. Add slash will let you describe what kind of section for the surface you want to have at what kind of a part of the surface, right? So you can control It's basically like a loft with a lot of control. Hit OK. Join these guys back up. That's rendered. Let me just do emap instead. Delete the curves. Personally, I prefer this kind of a shape, but you can, you know, you can disagree. It's just a personal taste. Let me check one last thing. Fillet edge. And if the radius is like, let's start with 1 just to see what it gives us. Yeah, nice. So fillet edge works as long as you don't have insane bends. And now emap. So that bend is a little bit softer now. Makes sense? Do I need to explain anything else with this approach? Don't be shy, or else I'll think that it's just me who's it's just me who's talking to an empty classroom. Instead of me talking to an empty classroom, I'm talking to Daniel and Kaisa, huh? Okay. So that's that with the blobs. Let me delete that. Come back here. Here too. Okay. Hide the form. So the last thing before we end this tutorial series is I want to talk about patience. You know, I believe this is a very important thing to discuss. Time and effort required to model out something that is curvilinear versus something that is rectilinear, right? If you're working on a, you know, on a building and you just go like, yeah, I have a box, I have another box, right? And I kind of boolean them together. And then I use shell, thickness of 1, whatever, and I say that these are open. You know, so I have something like this. And then I grab another box and I put it in here, and that's gonna be some sort of a, you know, let's say a wall that's going until the top of the ceiling here for some reason. Oh no, I need it to be a little bit longer. That's fine. I will just scale 1D, you know, kind of scale it up like so. Use Boolean union to join them up, and blah blah blah, right? So you keep working with the forms, and it's all clear because you're working with X, Y, and Z directions, right? You're basically working in a grid, which is as you're working within the grid, rectilinear shapes are very simple to kind of comprehend, understand, and control. But the problem with them is that they don't have that same, they don't bring that same aesthetical complexity as curvilinear shapes do. That's the first thing. not to say that rectilinear shapes are bad, that's definitely not it, but it's effort-wise, creating a rectilinear shape can be done in a very, very fast way. And that's why, you know, Revit has all of these preset tools for creating walls and slabs, but immediately when you need to do something more let's go for curvy, it starts breaking down really, really quickly, because for something that's curvilinear, you need to introduce so much more information into the model on how it's made, right? A box or an extrusion is just basically even something like this. Like I think that is, let me just grab a shape. You know, extrude, curve, something like this, an extrusion. It's curving in one direction. So something that is curving in one direction is still very easy to explain, because it's a shape that has a very not solid a constant section through and through, right? So it doesn't change in section. So it's still very easy to kind of comprehend. The moment when you start introducing lofts or some sort of a double curvature, is the moment where you start talking about what kind of curvature you're going to have. Is it, for instance, is it a straight section loft? Is it a normal loft? Is it perhaps a loose loft or a tight loft, right? So you have much more decisions that you need to make, and with those decisions comes time, right? So you need to spend a lot of time making those decisions, and this is where patience comes in, right? Having patience with your forms, and with everything that I've been showing here. So you can see that right now, while I was doing the Blender sculpt, I was talking to you guys and I was practicing, you know, sculpting and talking at the same time. So my Blender sculpt is definitely not inspiring, to say the least. But at least it, you know, kind of gives an understanding of how I see form and the ground becoming quite a seamless entity, you know. So something that is, let me hide this and let me turn on, let's say, rendered view. You know, how form and the ground become some sort of a shape that doesn't have a hard edge between them. Again, said that, does it have a hard edge? Does it not have a hard edge? That's up to you to decide. But those two, the ground and the building, need to react to one another in some way, right? And I've just used Blender for you know, to kind of model out the reaction between the two. So think of it this way: once you have sketched out the initial idea for this Thursday, so once you have the initial form and you say that this is the form that I'm going to use, so for this Thursday, it is going to be the form that you're going to use, or not necessarily use, but the form which you will be working on and changing until the mid review. But once you have the form on Tuesday, on Wednesday, the next step is going to be remodeling that form in Rhino according to what you need from it, right? So in this case, the example that I've shown here is I definitely need to remodel the connection part, and I could keep, you know, keep the dome shape as it is, for now, you know, as a mesh, but I definitely need to remodel the connection part between the leg and the ground condition. Simply because right now it's uncontrolled, it's way too muddy, and it even looks muddy here. Difference between patch, loft, surface. Patch and loft create a surface, and then edge surface, solved it with edge surface. Okay, so patch is, I've already showed the patch. For instance, I can select all of these curves and type in patch and get a patch surface through those curves. You know, I could do that, but reality is going to be, since, you know, I've just used patch on my curves, is basically the same muddy version of the mesh, only that it's done as a single surface. So that's not great. Patch is mostly used to create this kind of a free form surfaces that are bending in all directions. Oh, let me call you back. Just a second. Record. Okay, so we're back. So patch is not, if you need to just create a surface between two curves, you definitely don't use patch for that. Patch is like the worst case scenario of what kind of a tool to use. Edge surface would be, let me try and create a scenario where I would be using an edge surface in this case. Let me just see what we have. Ghosted. So we have something like this going on, that. And if I were to, this one. Can I do that? And then, yeah, okay. So let me quickly try and create a scenario where I would use a edge surface here. So for instance, this connection here is going to be problematic to solve. And let me try and kind of solve it. So the first thing is, let me draw it out in Photoshop. Where's my Photoshop? I'll just explain it in Photoshop. Am I recording? Yes, I am. That's good. Let's just wait for it to open up. Print screen? No. Oh crap! No. Print screen. Print screen. Chat. Am I lagging or not? Lagging? Am I still lagging? What about now? What about now? What about now? The screen is, if I rotate the screen, is it fine? Or should I accidentally pressed the airplane mode button as I was recording. Whoops. Let me, wait, stop sharing and share the screen again. And now it should be fine, hopefully. Yeah, I messed up with that one. My print screen button is, it works in the same way as a airplane mode button, so a little bit problematic there. But do you all see my Photoshop window now? Just trying to get the chat. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, that's good. So here I need to plan this out, right? How I'm going to. Hello? Oh, right. Mouse, go away. Tablet, come in. There we go. So I need to plan this bad boy out. Let me grab a brush and just go to town at it. So I have a, what the heck? That's the wrong shortcut. Opacity, full on. So I have a surface here that I want to make for sure. But the problem is that, let me undo real quick. The problem is that here I have a, zoom in, zoom. My God. There we go. I have an edge here, right? That just stops. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that, okay, so my surface is kind of doing this. I'm kind of going up. Let's see how far it can go up. And I think like for a nicer connection, I will be doing something like, whoop, something like that, right? So I have one ribbon doing this. And then I have another ribbon in between these two, right here. And that ribbon should connect like that, right? And then what I'm going to be left with is this triangle here that I will try and solve with edge surface, right? To fill in, let me make this smaller, to fill in this triangle here, right? So let's go back to Rhino, change to mouse, and try and do it. So first of all, that surface here, just again, a curve. And I'll just start from, let's see, this point, here, 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 here. Then I make sure that, okay, so that's a bad curve to use. Instead, I will use, in this case, curve interpolate points and try that again. Through here, through here, through here, and then through here. So this will force this curve to kind of snap to this corner here. And then as I continue, it will stay on that corner, which is useful. So we do something like this. Yeah, that is good. And then I will take this curve that I have had before, and I'll do exactly the same thing as I did for this connection, right? So I will put a point on my curve. Delete that. I'll put a point on my curve, select it, split, cutting objects, my point, delete the point. Now I have split this, lock that. Now I have, that's not locking, lock that. Now I have split my curve into this small guy here and this long guy somewhere, yeah, somewhere here. What about the curve in the middle? What do you mean? Okay, let me try it again. So I have a line here. That's good. I have a line here. Okay, that's good. I accidentally deleted one control point, so that's why the curve was shortened. But basically, I have split the curve into two pieces, right? And I have this curve right here. It's a little bit too far for blending, but yeah, I'll manage with it. I'll use blend curve between this one here, so between this curve and between this edge here. And it's going to make this kind of a blend between the two curves. Join, I will set it up so that it's, so that it's joining. And now I can just simply use a loft to loft these curves together. Only that, wait, maybe I can't. I'll use isolate to just see it better, what's going on here. Yeah, this curve is too long, right? So I need to fix it. And I'll fix it by using trim, select cutting objects. This is my cutting object, enter. Trimming off this guy, enter. And then instead of loft, perhaps I'll just use sweep between two rails, because that was, this tool was kind to me today. Sometimes it's a little bit messy, but this time it was kind, so I'll keep using it until it doesn't work anymore. Right, so back here, changes to the blue layer, flip it. There we go. So we have something like this. Okay, and you can see the more I rebuild, the less I'm looking at the mesh, right? And the more I'm looking at these surfaces that I already have. So now, what else do we need? Photoshop. Yeah, I need to fix this curve here, and it needs to blend together with this one. In this point right here. So let's do that. I will need this curve. Do I have any more curves? Hello? I don't. I'll just use duplicate edge to get my curve back. Duplicate edge is your friend. So I'll use that, isolate. Okay. I need to, ooh, this is a long one. I need to create a surface in between these curves, and the surface needs to kind of go and connect until here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to take, let's say, this point here, and use trim. I'll just get rid of that portion of the curve, and then use blend CRV. Blend these curves together, right? So I have that curve solved. Then I have this curve, that curve. So here it's a little bit, it's going to be a little bit funky with this line being so long. So I'll just put a point there and use it to trim this curve away. So my loft is going to be a little bit shorter. And also I'll use, where do they meet? Where do they meet? Let me explode this curve and just see if I can get rid of, yeah. So I could get rid of all of that part, join it back in, which means that this, where was it? Come on, there we go. This whole part was a duplicate on top of the curve in the back, so I don't need it. I'll use trim, clean it up a little bit more, and I now have two curves for my other sweep. I know it's a little bit convoluted, and it is indeed hard to kind of explain every step and why I'm doing it. But the more you sweep, the more you work with it, the faster and better you're going to become with it. I'll change this to my surfaces layer like that. Show selected. I'll just show all of my stuff here. Like this. And now, finally, we need to solve, what the? Can these two join? Ah, yeah, okay. So sometimes it will visually show you a break in the seam. Don't worry about it. As long as you've used the correct curves, it's fine. Because see how this breaks up? This is because Rhino shows your geometry as a mesh, even if it's a poly surface. And the mesh has some sort of a resolution attached to it. If I were to select both of these surfaces and use join, you can see that the seam is gone. They're now being meshed properly. This is just a visual, let's call it a glitch, a visual glitch. So now finally I can explain the edge surface to you. In this case, I'm going to use edge surface tool with 3 curves, but edge surface can be used with 2, 3, or 4 edge curves. So I'm going to create a surface in between these 3 edges here. To do that, I need those 3 edges. So I'll use duplicate edge, get that, and get that. These 3 edges, enter. I'll use isolate to kind of work with them in a clean way. And let's see, if I grab this line and I use trim, I can trim off this part, and for some reason I can't trim off this part. What the heck? Hello? What's up? Why can't I trim you? Is it a tolerance thing? Trim? Now I can trim it. That was very weird, but it worked. So we're happy. Then I will select these lines, these 2 long lines, which kind of come up into a single line, and I will explode them simply to see. No, that didn't help at all. That didn't help at all. So I will not explode them. Instead, I will turn on intersection object snap, and I'll basically just find the first intersection point between these 2 lines, which is going to be right here. So this is where those 2 lines meet. I'll put a point there. And I'll use that point to trim those the remaining two curves, those 2 extensions here. So now what I'm left with is 1 edge here, 1 edge here, and 1 edge here. And then I can use surface from 2, 3, or 4 edge curves, this guy right here. So I can choose this and select first, second, third edge, hit enter, creates a surface for me. Move it to my surfaces, layer, show. This is how it looks. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. So now let's actually see it in action when we kind of joined everything together, because all of the seams are they visually seem not to be aligned, but if I join them, see, now all of them are aligning properly. And I will use emap just so that it's easier to see with no. Is there like zebra, or is it another zebra? There we go. That doesn't help us. Now does it? Thinner. The fact that here, it's a little bit more messy is not concerning to me. If it shows up in the render for some reason, actually we can check if it shows up in the render. What the hell do I have here? Purge. Okay, not much, I guess. Let me just create a generic material. Apply to selection. Let's give it a little bit of reflection, not a little bit, a lot of reflection. just so that we can see better. That is fine. Render output. I'm running a 4K screen, so I need to increase the output so that you can see it better. Interactive on. Yeah, that's good enough, I think. Let me just run the render. Hello? Run the render. There we go. Yeah, that's not that bad. There is a little bit of a line here that I can see, but it's definitely not problematic. We can easily, you know, Photoshop it out later. But that's edge surface, right? When you have a hole with 3 or 4 edges, then you just use edge surface to kind of create a surface in that hole, around that hole. Right, so slowly but surely we are rebuilding the whole mesh, and this was done in what, like 2 hours or so. So, and with me taking, you know, showing you the helmet and showing you the blobs and so on, I think in 2 hours I would have already, you know, finished this whole part. If it was just, you know, me in silence with some I don't know, heavy techno playing in the background. So I guess not in silence. But to rebuild something like this, I would say 2 days. 2 days to rebuild something like this. So even for, you know, if you're completely new at it, I think in a week you would be able to rebuild everything into a single closed poly surface, which then could you could use all of the Boolean operations again and all of it, you know, everything with it. Time for questions. General questions, because we are done with the workshop, with all 3 weeks of our sweet workshops. So now it is the time to kind of either ask the questions or give comments or so, or anything. Good workshops. Thank you. Can we contact you during the day-to-day if we have problems? Absolutely, you can. Will we have more tutorials later, or is this all of it? This is all of it, but so we will not have any group tutorials anymore, right? All of the group tutorials were condensed into these 3 weeks of workshops. Right now, it's going to be individual tutorials for you guys, depending on what kind of project you are working on. So it's going to be like after this week, once this week is finished, then you will kind of sit down and hammer out, you know, a decent 3D model of the building, right? So this shape, everything that we've done so far was a form that will, like, for the lack of better word, inform your building design, right? So a form from which you will derive your building. So in coming week, you will actually remodel out the building as you think it should be, right? With the nice entrances and so on. And during the crit, which is going to be tomorrow. We are going to talk about, for each of you, we are going to talk about what are the next steps that you need to take before you can kind of go in here and start resurfacing everything into a Nurbs polysurface model. So that's going to be, the task for next week. Not resurfacing, but actually like changing the form so that it's more and more architectural. We have started with something that is very conceptually driven, something that is not, we didn't even talk about the form at the first week of the workshops. We just talked about the methods of how to achieve the form. Then during the second week, we started to talk about the form itself quite a bit. And then during the third week, which is this week, we started to talk about the relation between the form and the landscape. And we started kind of getting closer and closer into what kind of interior space qualities you would have, what kind of exterior space qualities you would have. And maybe not all of you have noticed it, but throughout these 3 weeks, we have started moving closer and closer this, first concept of, I am going to use this method to create a form, to a concept of, this is going to be my building, right? That was the purpose of these all of these tutorials and all of these webinars, to not start thinking about, to not start thinking about the building from the floor plan, but rather start thinking about the building from the roots, right? From the absolute base of what's underneath the geometry, right? So what is driving the geometry that will make up your building? Because if you're starting to think about the building from the plan, or from the function diagram, then it's going to be like any other building that you see. Because the most logical thing when you're thinking about it from the functional perspective is you make a bunch of rectangles that correspond to correct floor areas for each space. You assemble the rectangles in the correct network so that the accessibility from each space to the other is, clear and well planned out. And then when you have those rectangles, you just extrude them upwards, because vertical rectilinear walls are cheapest to build, right? And easiest to do. And then you punch out holes in those walls, preferably rectilinear holes in those walls, because you need light. And with our tradition in the school, you punch out more holes in the west and east facades, and less holes in south and winter and south and north facades, right? So that approach always gives you exactly the same building everywhere, in every part of not the country or the world, right? It's going to be the same approach. But if you start thinking about the method behind the generation of form, and that form, it doesn't matter at that stage if it's a building or if it's a horse or whatnot, if it doesn't matter at that stage, then you can come up with pretty interesting foundation, foundation principles for your shape, right? And this is what this course is all about. It's all about rethinking, or not necessarily rethinking, but thinking about a building as form rather than an envelope for function. Make sense? I don't know what kind of question I was answering here, but I can feel that I went on a tangent quite deep with this one. I think it was the, will we have any more group tutorials? So no, we will not have any more group tutorials. Individual work from now. Oh yeah, and contacting me or contacting Olga after this, like this is done. We will be available from like around 3 o'clock today. So between 12 and between now and 3 o'clock, we have other stuff to do. But after 3 o'clock, we will be available to help you guys out. So I guess we're done, right? If you don't have any more questions, don't have any more concerns, we're done. Decide what's important about your forms. Decide where you need to, but this is for later, but you will need to decide where you will need to rebuild those forms as Nurbs polysurfaces and where you can keep them as meshes, depending on what you will want to do with those forms later. But that's going to be a little bit later. For now, I think we're done, right? Right. Thank you for listening to my blabbing, and I'll see you guys when I see you. Well, tomorrow. Take care. Bye.